And this trend over the course of last 3 decades, 30 years, says some things to us. And that's what I want to highlight. I'll be more than happy to share this presentation with you if you are interested to have this and study more in your personal capacity. And I would love to engage in a dialogue with you as well. So I'll speak for about half an hour, and then inshallah, in the next 20 minutes or so, or the last 20, 30 minutes, we can talk about some questions and so on. But during my presentation, if you have any compelling questions or you want to make a point, don't hesitate, raise your hand, and we can talk about that as well. So how many of you were in United States when 9/11 happened in most of us, right? Yeah. How many of you have children under 20 years old? Under 3, okay, so mashallah, you have young children, right? Many of us have children around that age group, like 15, 18, 20, 22, even 25. You know, somebody who is 25 years old today in 2021 were born in 1996. So they were barely 3, 4 years old that happened. And when they got awareness about what happened, they were in 2nd grade maybe, right? 6, 7, 8 year old. So their whole psyche is built around all that they have experienced in their school life, in their personal life, with neighbors, with friends, and so on and so forth. So it's extremely important for us to remember that this generation is the generation who will become the leaders, potentially, of masajid and Muslim organizations and other places in the next 10, 20 years. So if they are deeply grounded in faith, then the chances are that they will do a great deal of work. But if their faith is shaky now, Allahu Alam, what will happen in the next 10, 20 years ago. So the presentation is broken down into 3 areas: masajid, Muslims, and then the masajid governance and program. So as I briefly mentioned in the Jummah khutbah today about the number of masajid, why is this important? So it says 2 things to us. One is that as a collective Muslims, we are growing, and which is a very, very healthy sign, which is what I focused on during my khutbah today. So here is a graph that you see from 1994 to 2020, for the last 26 years data. So we started approximately around 960 some masajid 26 years ago, and today we have 2769, right? So the number of masajid certainly are increasing consistently for the last 26 years. If you pay attention to the number underneath the number of masajid, the percentage number, the percentage of growth of masajid from 1994 to 2000 was 26%. And then you have a big boost after 2000 to 2010. You have 74%. And then from 2010 to 2020, the number of mosques increased, but the percentage decreased by half. So those of us who have done math or statistics, what this tells me is in 2030, the percentage of increase will reduce to 15% or approximately. In 2040, it will become at a plateau, right? It will taper off. Guess what's going to happen after 2040? It will go down. Either it will stay there or it will go down. I have a hypothesis, and this is what I did not want to say during the Jummah khutbah today for obvious reasons. I wanted to focus on positives during Jummah. Now I want to not necessarily focus on, but lift up and highlight potential dangers that I see on the horizon. I hope I am absolutely wrong, and I wish to be wrong. I pray that I am wrong. But this is what I see based on the data that I see. So by 2040, 2050, you will see a decline in masajid and everything else that comes with it. This is obvious. Most masajid that are large number of masajid increasing, they are in large metropolis areas, not as much as in the rural America, so to speak. So some of these cities that are obvious, New York, California, Texas, and so on, this is where a good number of big masajids are being established. This is a phenomenon, this is something interesting phenomenon, that most masajid that have increased over the course of last 10 particular years that happened in the south, in the south part of United States. In other words, in the Bible Belt, which is very interesting phenomenon to think of. Under the climate of Islamophobia, most number of masajid have increased in the southern part of United States, which is most hostile to Muslims and Islam. Very interesting. I don't know the rationale for that, but that is certainly something interesting to make a note of. Fewer masajids located in large cities, but more in older suburbs. So our masjid is in an older suburb as opposed to Los Angeles, for example. So the growth of masajid is less in urban large cities than in the urban older suburbia. And this is just a statistic, number of masajid that are actually built, purpose-built, like this masjid, as opposed to you buy a church or a synagogue or any other community center, and then you convert it into a masjid. And then this is some numbers around that. As I mentioned, this is more clear now. You can see the number of masajid, the percentage of masajid purpose-built, and the actual number of the masajid that are actually built. This is also interesting because if we all know it, this is no secret, pre-2001, Muslim community used to get a whole lot of funding from overseas, particularly from the rich Gulf dumps. Oil sheikhs used to send a whole lot of money to Muslims in North America, and we use that money to build masajid and organizations and what have you. Post-2000, that money completely reduced or ended actually. It became extremely difficult to get that money. So by the grace of Allah, Muslims living in United States contributed to actually this building of masajid in the last 20 years, which is very, very healthy sign. And I'll tell you how that is impacting us. Most mosques moved to present location within the last 20 years, meaning that we were at some other place. So the history of this masjid, those of you who have been living here for the last 25 years, you would know. It used to be in a medical office on Magnolia and Fullerton. Then it moved to a dog house, literally a dog house. I don't know what street that was, but I think a main street and something. And then it moved to here. The masjid was next door, and then this masjid was built, and so on. Right? So most masajid have moved from their older location to the current location in these last decade. Here is an example of Islamophobia in action. More than 1/4, 25% of masajid face hostility from the neighborhood, that no, you cannot build a masjid here. And there are many examples here in Southern California, whereby the community, the local city and a municipality gave hard time in building masajid. And this tells us basically the level of Islamophobia and the hostility that still exists in the country. Highest levels of mosque opposition occurred in the last 10 years. So now some of us who may think that the more hostility was immediately after 9/11, this data shows us wrong. The most hostility was not during from 2000 to 2010, but in fact from 2011 to 2020. Keep this in mind. How can we address this as a Muslim collective, right? Because if this hostility continues to grow, our children will be affected and impacted by that hostile environment. Now, the people who are being hostile to the Muslim community are also of different ages, including the young people, who will assume the leadership in various agencies in this country, and they will subject the minority communities, such as Muslims in North America, in even more hostile. Discrimination at work, discrimination and bullying at schools, different policies that are unhelpful, if not hostile to Muslim community, and so on and so forth. Of course, this is obvious. Majority of the masajid leadership express a level of concern about safety and security of masajid. As we know that, in several masajid are burned down, as I mentioned again in the Jummah khutbah. In Southern California, there are 2 masajid that are burned down, several masajid vandalized. And this is a new phenomenon. In the past, masjid door is always open 24/7, no lock. People would come, stay, and sometimes even sleep, and what have you. That model has changed completely in the last 10, 20 years. Masajid have a lock and key, in some cases security guard, and all of that. Now, in terms of the participants in the masjid, those who come to the masjid, and I talked about this in the afternoon as well, so this is a little bit more deeper detail for that. And I mentioned this about the Jummah size, right? The attendance during the Jummah Salat. 1994, 150 people, 2000, 292, 2010, 353, 2020, 410, average throughout the country, taking into average. Again, I would draw your attention to the number below the line of the percentage. So if you pay attention to what happened between 1994 and 2000, the percentage of growth of the Jummah Musallin was 95%. In other words, literally doubled. From 2000 to 2010, you see the increase percentage is only 21%. Number increase from 292 to 353, but the percentage is only 21%. This is scary part for me as a Muslim, as a parent, as a community member. Then you look at the percentage of growth from 2010 to 2020, reduced by 5%, became 16%. Now keep in mind the earlier slide we saw of the masajid, number increase, percentage decrease. Musallin increasing, percentage decreasing. What does it mean? It means you will have lots of masajid with lesser and lesser musallin, and at some point it will again go at a plateau, and then it will go down. So we know this for fact. In terms of the statistically speaking, it's a fact. There is a certain curve that you go up, then you have a plateau, and then you shrink or you slide down. So my grandchildren, my oldest daughter is 26 years old. She's going to have a baby, inshallah, next year, which is 2021. In 2040, she will be 20 years old. She will be part of the 2040 congregation when there will be only, I don't know, Allahu Alam, but much less number of people than the number of people that we have today. As a parent, I am concerned. As a community member, I am concerned. As a responsible human being, I am concerned that if this trend continues, so now the advantage you and I all have today is that we can see this to the extent that we can see, again, statistically speaking, Allahu Alam what happens tomorrow, but I can plan today. We plan our professional life, we plan our academic life, we plan our business life, that if I do X, Y, and Z, I will have A, B, C. If I don't do this, I don't get that. So if we let the status quo as is, as of today, I am willing to bet $1 or bet a box of baklava that, again, mathematically speaking, I am extremely concerned about my grandchildren. I'm not as concerned about my children today, but I am very concerned about my grandchildren. And I have no clue about my great-grandchildren in 2060 or 70. large Juma attendance became more common over the past 20 years. Very good sign. People became more active. People would like to go to the masajid. People like to participate, show their identity, have pride in their identity. Alhamdulillah, that is fantastic. And there are some numbers as to what is the large congregation. Is it 200? Is it 500? And so on. And the large congregation is 501 plus. But the most increase happened in the area of masajid that are between 200 to 500 number. Also, this is interesting. Most masajid reported increase in the attendance of Jummah Salat mostly in 2020, between 2010 and 2020, not between 2000 and 2010. As you can see that, 10% of the Musallin increased in 2020 by about 7%. But you also see in 2020, the number that is declined increased in 2020 also. So if the last bar that you see, 6% was in 2010, and then in 2020, that number doubled actually to 11%. So you see these indicators in a very subtle way. It's a combination of masajid increasing, congregation decreasing by percentage wise. This is average, based on average number of participants. If we want to determine what's the total population of the Muslim community in North America, right? So if the average size is, average Jummah congregation is 400, please. No. So this survey was done until 2020, but the most data collected until 2020 was done probably in the first and the second quarter of 2020. So it did not take in consideration the actual COVID numbers and so on. So there is a margin of error, as in any study, 3 to 5. True. So you have a population, mosque Muslims, for 4 million people. That's the average. Number of mosques times number of congregants is the total population. But this also means that 50 to 60% of the Musallin are not connected with masajid. And these 4 million people who are mosqued or who are connected with masajid are not the ones who pray 5 times a day in the masjid or even 3 times a day in the masjid, Fajr, Maghrib and Isha. These are Jummah Salatis. And we know in every masjid that we have gone to, if you look at the percentage of people who actually pray Salat al-Jummah and the percentage of people you have in Maghrib is a disproportionate number. 5% of the people of the Jummah actually pray Salat al-Maghrib. Fajr and Isha is even less. So this 4 million people are actually of the Jummah. It again reminds us the 95% of the people, if not more, are disconnected or unmosqued from the masajid. And we all have witnessed in Salat al-Eid, Salat al-Eid al-Adha, we prayed in the park, 3,000 to 4,000 people. Jummah Salat, less than 1,000 people. It's not unique to our masjid, it is universal. Number of converts per masjid. Those masajid who keep track of the number of people who take Shahada, again you see from 16.5% back in 1994, reduced now to 11%. So this tells us whether we are doing outreach to the community, whether we are spending money and resources, but do we have people who are actually helping others to become Muslim? And if so, how? Do we have materials? Do we have introductory materials in multiple languages? The largest minority ethnic community in the country today are Latinos. And a large number of them don't speak English. The number of conversions in the African American community is attributed to 2 things by and large over the course of last 50 years in this country. 1, language, they spoke English, we speak English. Two, we have certain high-profile people who became Muslim from their community. Muhammad Ali, marhum, may Allah give him Jannah. Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, may Allah give him Jannah. Right? These people made Islam popular within their community. So now, as a consequence, a large number of African American community members are Muslims. In the Latino community, we have no organized outreach in the context of Dawah, zero, at the local level and at the national level. So if you're looking at 24% of the population, and let alone, this is a nationwide number. California is altogether a different story. California is part of Mexico, quote unquote, the Republicans say that, you know, as a teaser, right? So the Muslim community has not invested time, money, and resources in outreaching to this particular segment of the population, which is continually growing and exponentially will grow over the course of last 20 years, right? So the people of color will be the largest majority they already are, little less than 50% in the latest census said of the 2020. In the next 10, 20 years, without a doubt, the people of color, so to speak, will be exponentially more than the quote-unquote white Anglo-Saxon Protestant community. But we have not invested any time, money, and resources in that regard. Number of conversions in masajid has declined since 2000. So if you look at the previous slide, you can see 16.5 to 11%, 11 people per year per masjid. And now, if you look at the number of conversions in terms of percentage over the course of these 20 years, you clearly see that it has decreased over the course of last decade. Proportion of Latino converts continue to climb while proportion of African American converts decline. So today, Sister Jennifer took Shahada here. I don't know whether she's Latina, but definitely she is not an African American person, right? So conversions of the Latino community is increasing, but it is not increasing at the percentage and the rate that we experienced in the African American community. And I would argue that it is happening not in spite of, but despite of our inaction toward the Latino community. Imagine if we were to do this, have Qur'ans here in translation in Spanish language. But the Shabir is here, so I'm saying this not to call you out, but call the leadership out, is to have the materials in Spanish language in our masajid, in our homes. Pamphlets that are available in Spanish language in abundance online, that we should have that available to us. Khutbahs, for example, I wouldn't even mind if 25% of the khutbah time is done in Spanish language. Corona is a hub of Latino community in Inland Empire. If we were to do outreach and say we have a conversation about Islam 101 in Spanish language and pass out flyers and ask the city to promote it in the name of outreach and building relationship and knowing one another, lata'arafu, you'll be surprised. That's the least we can do, and we can do that very easily. More men convert to Islam than women over the past 20 years. I mean, this is just a statistic, neither this way or that way. American mosques remain ethnically diverse, although proportion of African American attendees has declined. So if you look at our masjid, for example, I always pay attention when I'm giving Jummah khutbah from the member because I have a fairly good view. Less than 5% of African American people come to masjid here. It may be because they don't live in the area, or it may be because they are not comfortable. So masajid can also play an important role in making sure that masjid is inclusive. It speaks a language that is common and universal to all. It has a culture and accountability in a fashion that makes sense to all. For example, and I'm saying this in jest, in a light-hearted moment. In a particular masjid, I was giving a talk and I asked them about the diversity issue, inclusivity issue, and so on. They said, no, brother, we are open. Our masjid is open to everybody. So I said, on Friday evening when you have programs, what do you serve? He said, we serve excellent Pakistani food. So I said, how many non-Desi people, non-South Asian people do you know who eat spicy food? Particularly those who are born and brought up here, including our children. They don't. So you're not being inclusive, you are being exclusive actually. And this is not with an ill intent, but this is just, you have to change our orientation, that we are inclusive in our actions, in our words, in our behavior, in our conversations, in our services and resources that we provide, and so on and so forth. The proportion of African American dominant masajid declined since 2010. In other words, masajid who are, let's say, inner city masajid. So those of us who are familiar with Los Angeles, there are about 20 masajid, quote unquote, within the inner city of or 10-mile radius from downtown LA. Their number decreased, and the thinking is that those people are moving out to suburbia, and as a consequence, they are praying in suburban masajid than in the inner city masajid. This is also extremely important. Mosques bring more young people than churches in masajid. Healthy, but if you look at the age distribution, in the masajid 18 to 34, of course 24% are coming, and only 11% in the churches. And if you look at my age group, 35 to 64, 45% of the congregants are my age group in masajid, and only 37%. And of course, the 65 plus are elders, are respected elders. In churches, there are more, and masajid, there are less, right? But if you look at the next slide, and this is where I am concerned. Young Muslims, although make up majority of the community, but less than a third of regular masjid attendees. In other words, if we take the Muslim total population in North America, you're looking at anywhere between 7 to 8 million. More than 50% of them are age group between 18 and 34. But only quarter of them are coming into masajid. That means 75% of the young population are not connected with the masjid at all. So as parents, we need to figure out why. And for the masjid leadership, we need to figure out why those young people are not coming. Is it because we are not speaking their language? Is it because we are not providing the programs that make sense to them? Is it because Jazakallah khair. Is it because of any other factor? Is it because we don't have a youth director who talks their language, who brings them in, who keeps them busy, who keeps them involved and engaged, and so on and so forth? But this is an extremely, extremely really alarming and concerning fact. And these slides I will go probably quite fast. Imams, the age group of imams is also important because they can connect with young people and so on. Half of the masajid have full-time paid imam. For this number also is increasing. Pre-2000, imams were imported. They used to come from outside. And this is the employment status of the imams in various masajid, full-time, part-time, or volunteer basis. You still see smaller masajid have part-time imams way more than bigger masajid, who have more full-time paid imams, 92%. So almost all masajid with 500 plus congregation has an imam. 50% plus have imams degree in Islamic studies. While it is good, but 50% don't have Islamic studies degree at all. These are where they got the degrees from. This is also a growth area. Half of the US born imams are African American, who are mostly employed or volunteer in the inner city masajid, not in the suburban masajid. Half of foreign born imams are Arab. Simply a fact. I think between the South Asian and the Arab community, you have most of the imams, most of the scholars. Far more full-time paid imams are foreign born than the US born. In other words, our young people are not going to seminary or higher schools of learning to learn Islam and then become imams. Not many young Muslims are interested in this position. Multiple reasons. A, aptitude. B, of course, masajid don't pay imams enough. I mean, pre-2000, the percentage of imams who were employed by masajid were less than 10%. And now it increased anywhere between 10% to 90%. But still, the imams are least paid in terms of their salary and their compensation compared to churches and synagogues. More than 2/3 of masajid pay their full-time imam $50,000 or more. So if an imam is living in California, $50,000 is a little bit over poverty wage, particularly if the imam is married and have 2-3 kids. Right, wrong, good, bad, something to think, something to talk about. You get what you paid for, as they say. This is a much larger discussion why this is happening and how can we fix it. And here is the salary range. So if you look at $75,000 and above, in very large congregation, 1,000 plus, about 56% earn that much. Otherwise, very, very little. And as a consequence, they are not as interested in this profession either. So as collective Muslims, we need to think through what can we do to bring more imams. I will skip these. These are not that important. I mean, important in one way, but not as this is a very good number. Fewer masajid reported conflict in 2020 as opposed to 2010. So you have 3 questions: no conflict, conflict but not as serious, and very serious conflict. So if you look at the numbers, no conflict is reduced by 20%, but serious conflict increased by 10%. And this is because of the governance issues, the policies, procedures, transparency, accountability, reporting back to the community, and all of these factors are key in creating or mitigating problems and conflicts in masajid. Proportion of masajid with 4 or more full-time employees doubled over the last 10 years, which is also a very good sign. We can do much more, but that's the number that we see. Nearly half of the full-time paid staff positions are for imam. Now, it's a good sign that we do have, imams in the paid positions, but there is no other paid position in most cases other than the imam. So if I'm thinking of, let's say, the earlier slides we talked about, that only 24% of young people ages between 18 and 34 come to masajid, 76% don't. So can we think about now, if we were to have a youth director or person who is of their age group and who are connecting with number of young people, so you have a staff resource who is helping us to bring our children of that age group into masajid and connecting them. These are all not as important. Of course, the mosque budgets also increased over the course of last 10 years by a fairly healthy sign, which is also very good, and I think Muslims should be proud of our generosity in sharing our resources for the growth of Muslims in the country. And of course, masajid essentially have, the source of revenue is, our contribution during Jummah Salat, Ramadan, and maybe occasional capital fundraiser of some kind. This is also very alarming, and I'll tell you why in the bigger scheme of things. We talked about the number of congregants and the percentage of congregants in Jummah Salat. So if Jummah collection is 52%, and if these numbers decrease, which happened in COVID, by the way, the revenue for the masajid decreased. If the revenue for masajid decreased, the programming decreases, or you have to let go the staff. Corona, mashallah, was a blessed community, or is a blessed community, very generous and continued to contribute even during COVID. As a consequence, no staff member was let go here. But broadly speaking, throughout the country, they have had the challenge. Now, remember what I mentioned to you about the number of masajid and number of congregants, number increasing, percentage decreasing. After the plateau, what will happen is you have a huge, humongous, beautiful masjid whose expense is X, fixed expense, whether you open the masjid 5 times a day or you don't open the masjid 5 times a day. There's a fixed expense to it. And if your number is decreasing, guess what? You don't have the revenue to keep it up. Now, you also saw that about 50% of the masajid were purchased from churches. I pray to Allah that I am wrong. But I predict that if this trend continues, mathematically speaking and statistically speaking, by 2060, masajid will be sold. There is no other option for masajid because you just can't maintain. If your expense is $500,000 and your revenue is $100,000, guess what you're going to do? Now, by the grace of Allah, our masajid are mostly paid for structure-wise. All we have to do is maintain them. So even that maintenance cannot be maintained if your congregation continues to decrease after the plateau and it is not in proportion to the expenses that's required. So masajid now need to begin to build an endowment, waqf, which is a Muslim legacy in our tradition. So I would urge the leadership that, hey, masjid brothers and sisters, you are giving your dollar to the masjid for operation and expenses. Please allocate 10 cents for endowment. And slowly we build this. We have all retirement funds. We have 401k, don't we? Why do we have that? We have that because at some point in time we will not be able to work and the social security is not going to be enough for our survival. There our investments and our 401k will help. Masajid are no different. So the expenses are either going to remain the same, fixed, or increase because of the inflation, and your congregation size and revenue will decrease, and there will be a point where the threshold will pass, and then you will be in deep, deep trouble. So masajid needs to start thinking about this, and we as a community need to also encourage masajid as well that, hey, I'm giving you $1, I'm giving you $100 a year. I want you to use $80 for the operations and $20 for the endowment. Because I want to make sure that my children have a space to come and pray 20 years down the road, 40 years down the road. And that's the only way. There is another statistic that I don't have it here, but I will tell you something very important. And how many of us are here who are 30 years and younger? Raise your hand. 30 years or younger. Okay, 1, 2, okay. Here's a statistic that is not in my presentation, but another time I will talk about this. If masajid were to examine the source of revenue, who is giving donations to the masjid? And we did this during my Shura Council time about 10 years ago. People who are 50 and 60 and above give 80% of the donations to the masajid. So my age group and older than me. Younger people, 30 and above, that's why I asked you guys, don't give as much. On the other hand, people who are 50, 60, 70-year-olds who are first generation immigrants, myself like, we earn less money than the 30-year-olds. Fresh graduates coming out of school these days make a salary that was the top salary of my professional work life. An IT graduate earns about $150,000 average in the state of California. An engineer or a doctor even who came to this country 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 50 years ago ends up making about $250,000 at the most. So what you're looking at is the age group of mine will be dead in the next 10, 20 years. Allah knows how much life do we have. If we are the source of 80% of the revenue today, and the other people, who are young people who are not coming to masjid and who are not donating to masajid, guess what's going to happen? Very bleak situation, very dark scenario. And these are the things that I didn't want to talk about in the Jummah Salah today, because I don't want to scare people. But these are facts. These are things that we can see literally on the horizon. But the beauty is that we can think about these things today to plan for tomorrow. I'll stop there, inshallah. And as promised, 5 minutes or 7 minutes more than what I thought. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions and hear your ideas and your concerns. Please. Sure. So those of you who couldn't hear him, the brother's perspective is that, tawakkal and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped us to reach where we are, and inshallah we'll continue. And I believe that. But I would urge us to also think about the famous saying of tie the camel. So do your best, and then inshallah do tawakkal, not just tawakkal. If you can take your mask and speak so I can hear properly. Yeah. Donations. Right. Good point. So those of you who couldn't hear him, his suggestion was that we should also buy or invest in something that produces income for the masjid, so we are not exclusively relying on the donations only. That is correct, and that's what the waqf is all about. So some masajid have purchased retail property, and then rented it out, or bought houses and then rented them out, and things like that, and that's waqf. Something that for us to also consider. Let me turn the fan off so I can hear you and you can hear me well. Some of us Muslim community that we also need to think about is, when we die, there is a process. I $500 in my assets. My children will get X. My spouse will get X, and so on and so forth. Now, Muslims might like to start thinking, can I dedicate X% of in my will, beneficiary making masjid as my beneficiary? This is how churches and synagogues grew and became what they became. Now, in their tradition and in their faith, they are not required to give to children. In our tradition, we are required to give, unless the children say, I don't need. Or the parents can encourage our children and say, mashallah, you're well settled, you're making $150,000, you have your ends meeting fairly well, you have allocations and designations for the retirement fund, blah, blah, blah. You don't have as much of a need. How about if I give 10% in your name to the masjid? So when I die, masjid gets that. That's another way to build endowment in the masjid. So I think as individuals, we need to think, because obviously we are not going to take anything in our khabar. When we die, we die. So there's nothing we take. So we need to think through that if our circumstances allow. And in fact, there are tax benefits also. in your lifetime, if you make a trust, build a trust, and allocate a certain percentage of your assets to a nonprofit beneficiary, you don't pay taxes on that. So this is something, maybe I will have a tax expert sometime come and give a presentation on this for those of us who are interested. But endowment is the bottom line that we need to be starting to think about. You have a question also? Say again, I'm sorry. Oh, so this data was collected over the course of last 3 years, from 2017 all the way until 2020 spring and summertime, throughout the country. In some cases where there are Shura councils, through the Shura council membership of Masajid, and where there are no Shura councils, direct contact with Masajid leadership, and through phone calls, through emails, through questionnaire, submitting them and getting the data and then compiling it. So it was done during the last 2-3 years, 2.5 years or so. Any other question, comment, concern? I want to come and hear you because I can't hear you. Yeah, I think the door is also open, so I can't. True. Right. Manageable. Yeah. Right. Right. True. True. Yeah, no, this is a very good point. I mean, the Islamic schools, full-time Islamic schools certainly are a source of, or can be a source of revenue, and it's a catch-22. So schools can pay well to their staff when they have reasonable revenue, either through fees or through some other endowment and so on. If they don't have, then the teachers are not paid as much. If the teachers are not paid as much, the quality of education is not as good. And as a sequence, parents don't send the children to this. So we don't have, because public education K-12 is free in this country, most parents, overwhelming majority, I would say, send our children to public school. Only those who can afford, the Islamic school. So we don't have the critical mass, so to speak, yet. There are some models in the country that I am aware of where the schools are actually supporting masjid, not masjid supporting schools, but schools supporting the masjid. There are 2 schools in Chicago. One is called Universal School, which is a co-ed for boys and girls, and then there is a girls-only school called Al-Aqsa in Bridgeview, Illinois. And both schools have a waiting list of anywhere between 200 to 500 every year. Their fees are modest, but what they did was the masjid invested money to build the quality of the school for the first 5 years. And they actually had reserve funds to make sure the teachers are all certified, they are well qualified, and they will not compromise on quality of education. And they will enroll children whether they can afford full fee, they can half or less or whatever. Masjid will subsidize. As a consequence, what happened was, people who can afford, who live elsewhere, when they heard that, there is this wonderful opportunity where my kids can go to school, they started moving into that area. And as a consequence, the school started building student to teacher ratio, and today they have a waiting list. Both schools have about 600 plus students, both full-time, and both all the way up to high school, and they produce income. So it can happen, but it requires some planning and some investment of initial investment in the resources, and then it can potentially happen. Yeah. Yes, yeah. I can. I'm 61 now. I can. Sure. Yeah. Right. Right, right. Yeah, no, you're right. I think the masajid at the local level are beginning to think now of this idea of the endowment. 10 years ago, if you were to ask me, this conversation did not exist. The good news is that many bigger masajid now are thinking along those lines, and some masajid, in fact, have actually started their endowment program. I know the Shura Council, Southern California here, had conducted how to build an endowment and what are the legalities of it, what are the benefits of it, and so on and so forth. They did provide some workshops, and I think it is time for us to maybe in this community we can do that. But the national organizations, they themselves are into building endowment for themselves, because the bigger the budget, the bigger the operation, the bigger the need for the endowment. So they not necessarily have the resources to help the local masajid. Local masajid have to do on their own pretty much. But the technical know-how, yes, they can provide. Probably they have that information and those resources, and we can reach out to them and say, hey, can you come and give us a workshop about how to do this, and the community can benefit from it as well. Like I mentioned, in my lifetime, if I allocate my total assets, a percentage of my total assets to a nonprofit beneficiary, I don't pay taxes on that. So if I have $1 million sitting in my saving account or investment account or whatever, and I give $250,000 to the masjid, say that when I die, I give $250,000 to the masjid, I'm not paying taxes on that $250,000 every year. So I'm saving money. And I'm not taking the 250 in my grave anyways. You have a comment? So, yeah, I'm sure this in time this will happen. As I mentioned, the conversation has started because the immediate needs are so intense and so much that people are unable to move in that direction. But there is conversation, there is thinking, there is active planning, and some are doing more, some are doing less, depending on which community that we go to. But over time, I'm pretty confident that that will happen. And those masajid who will do it, I think they will be in a better shape in 10, 20, 30 years than those who don't. I think we are just about time for Isha. So Jazakallah khair for those of you who wanted to take time and explore this. May Allah accept whatever little that we do for ourselves, our children and grandchildren, and may Allah give us the tawfiq to, inshallah, continue the work that we are doing, and may Allah reward those who are doing this on a volunteer basis in different communities, including this community, out of their volition. Nobody asked them to do this, but they stepped up and they are doing this so that we all can benefit from this experience. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.